Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. Hey everyone, I want to share a story that still shakes me and my boyfriend to this day. A couple of years ago, I moved to the UK for university. It was a huge step, but I needed to escape a toxic family situation back home. My first year was spent in student accommodation, where I met some amazing people and relished my newfound independence. I didn't meet my boyfriend until later. By my second year, I moved into a house with some friends, rented through the university. Having our own space, free from the noise restrictions of the previous year's shared flat, was a welcome change. My room was on the ground floor, with a window overlooking a small yard. I often went out there to smoke. A thin, old wooden door led to the street, where we kept our bins. This door could only be locked from the inside of the yard. To keep it securely closed, we tied it shut with strings. We had neighbors on both sides. On one side lived 5 men who seemed much older than typical university students. They were off. One day, a terrifying incident occurred. One of them attacked his flatmates with a kitchen knife and set their kitchen on fire. Seeing one of them covered in cuts and blood was horrifying. My flatmates and I helped clean him up and gave him a shirt. The police arrested the attacker, but the injured man, whom we'd helped, was unsettling. He spoke incoherently and made unwanted advances towards me. We noticed he smoked a lot of marijuana but tried to be understanding. After that, I'd occasionally see him when returning from university or running errands. Once, he approached me near a corner shop, attempting a bizarre conversation. I felt deeply uncomfortable and ignored him. He said something chilling, like, "I'll wait for you in front of your house so we can talk." I dismissed it as a bad joke, bought my drink, and headed home. But as I turned onto my street, there he was, with his flatmate, sitting on my doorstep. I panicked and called my male flatmate to ask him to tell them to leave, but he wasn't home. I waited nervously until they finally left an hour later. I rushed inside, locked the door, and felt a wave of relief. Despite this, things escalated. One day, while smoking in the backyard, I noticed the wooden door was open. The strings we used to secure it were cut. I closed it and put on new strings, assuming it was a mistake. Our strange neighbors often made loud noises, disturbing us at night, but we'd grown somewhat accustomed to it. One night, my boyfriend stayed over. He woke suddenly to loud noises and whispering. He quietly woke me, and we listened in the dark. Suddenly, the wooden door banged open, and we heard footsteps near my window. We froze as the backyard door shook, as if someone was trying to break in. Thankfully, our curtains were closed. We were prepared to dress quickly and escape through the window if they entered. Then, we heard my window slide open further, and one of the men spoke in an unintelligible language. They were trying to get inside. My boyfriend and I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, got dressed, and fled the room and the house. I called my flatmates and then the police. Luckily, the police station was nearby, and they arrived within 5 minutes. I was in shock and remember little after their arrival. They apprehended one of the men, but the other escaped, only to be found a few streets away, smoking marijuana. The police searched their house and found drugs and a large kitchen knife. The thought of them trying to break in with such dangerous intentions terrified me. I had never provoked them, so I couldn't understand why they targeted us. One of them was sentenced to 2 years in prison for possessing a weapon with intent to harm. I moved back home a few months later, overwhelmed by fear and the persistent thought of what might have happened if my boyfriend hadn't woken up. I still cope with the trauma. I often wake up at the slightest noise and have nightmares, but I'm incredibly grateful for my boyfriend's support. Talking about it helps immensely. I want to share a bizarre story from my time in Ireland, a couple of years back. I spent nearly a year in Galway as part of a university exchange program. Now, I'm originally from Northern Ireland, so moving to a different part of the country was still a significant change. I settled into a cozy apartment in a charming neighborhood. Most of the people I met were incredibly friendly and welcoming, typical Irish hospitality, except for one elderly woman who lived next door. She stood out for all the wrong reasons. About a month into my stay, our group of international students decided to attend a local music festival, known for its vibrant atmosphere. It was a night of music, laughter, and soaking in the Irish spirit. We might have overindulged a bit, sampling various beers and whiskies from all over Ireland. By the time we caught the last bus home, I could barely remember my own name, let alone what had transpired. The next morning, at 6 a.m., I was jolted awake by the incessant ringing of my doorbell. My head was pounding, and the noise was excruciating in my small apartment. I stumbled to the door and peered through the peephole to find a police officer standing there. I panicked, wondering what kind of trouble I might have gotten into the previous night, but all I could recall was calling my girlfriend and crashing on the couch. The officer explained there had been a noise complaint. Confused and still slightly intoxicated, I managed to convince him that nothing had happened, and he left. The following morning, same time, same scenario, 2 police officers at my door due to another noise complaint from my neighbor. I invited them inside to demonstrate my innocence, showing them that I had simply been watching Netflix and quietly fallen asleep. They informed me that the complaints were coming from a neighbor I had never met. I dismissed her as simply being grumpy, or perhaps even prejudiced against foreigners. I consulted with the university student support officer, who decided to move me to a different apartment on a lower floor. I was frustrated, as I had just settled in, but I had no choice. They planned to help me move the next morning. Have you ever had one of those nights where you wake up in a cold sweat, convinced something terrible is happening? That night, I went to bed early, preparing for the move. Then, at 3 a.m., my doorbell erupted, ringing louder and more frantically than ever before. I was terrified, frozen in bed, unsure of what to do. After what felt like an eternity, the ringing stopped. I cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole, but saw nothing. I just knew it was that crazy neighbor. I barely slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, still shaken, I kept peeking out my door, worried the neighbor might confront me again. When I checked my balcony, I saw her for the first time. She had somehow contorted herself around the fence separating our balconies, staring directly at me. It was Eerie. We locked eyes briefly, before she swiftly retreated back to her side. Moments later, the doorbell rang again. I was convinced I was trapped in some horror movie scenario. Thankfully, it was just the movers arriving to help me relocate. I quickly explained the situation and hurriedly packed my belongings to move downstairs. Apart from one unsettling encounter where she showed up at my new place, asking about the police, I managed to avoid her after that. It seemed the police had stopped responding to her calls, for which I am immensely grateful. This isn't just a creepy encounter with one person, it's a whole community held hostage by one man. Our neighbor, somewhat infamous for his impossibly lush, meticulously maintained lawn, a testament to his obsessive nature, had a reputation for a volatile temper. I'd heard whispers of him berating the landscaping crew, but the real red flags began last summer. He enlisted a teenage boy to check on his house while he was away, promising simple tasks like securing doors and watering flowers. However, the instructions he left were far from simple. He demanded the boy visit multiple times a day, switching lights on and off at precise intervals, and completing bizarre chores. The boy was forbidden from stepping on the lawn and had to remove his shoes before walking on the sidewalk. He was never to enter the house, but to manipulate the light switches from the doorway using a stick with a loop. He was also forbidden to use the garden hose, and was instead told to use a tiny watering can. The letter implied the neighbor would be surveilling him, with photographic evidence of any non-compliance. Understandably, the boy's parents put an end to the arrangement, offering to keep a casual eye on the house instead. Upon his return, the neighbor confronted them at dawn, attempting to instigate a fight. A retired police officer, another neighbor, intervened to de-escalate the situation. The crazy neighbor demanded he be allowed to bear a spank the boy, and erupted when denied. Shortly after, he cornered another neighbor at the grocery store, launching into a half-hour tirade. He ranted about wives not having friends and made crude remarks about his wife's sister. This incident fueled existing concerns about his wife's increasingly reclusive behavior. Once a social butterfly, she was now rarely seen, only occasionally tending to her flowers while her husband was conspicuously present. During winter, unsolicited pamphlets from his landscaper appeared in everyone's mailboxes, accompanied by a note demanding we all use their services, threatening legal action for noncompliance. In our private, non-HOA neighborhood, this was patently absurd. One winter day, someone saw his wife with a sling and a black eye. When they tried to inquire, he silenced her, claiming she'd slipped on ice. Subsequent attempts to speak with her privately have failed. Even the church got involved, and a welfare check was requested while he was away, but she refused help. He also threw a fit about snowplows, scattering screws on the road to deter them. Then, a new family with a puppy moved in. They were awakened in the night by their doorbell. The crazy neighbor stood at the edge of their property, threatening that if the dog ever escaped, it would be gone. He then either brandished a gun and waved it, or pointed it towards the backyard and said, "Bang." They called the police, but he claimed he was simply out for a walk and thought they were awake, denying any threat. He received a citation. As spring arrived, he began sitting outside, observing everyone who passed. He'd react to every pedestrian and vehicle. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but many of us, myself included, started taking alternate routes to avoid him. Recently, someone installed a swing set in their backyard. They returned home to find tire tracks and the swing set crushed. The neighbor's truck, with its distinctive tires, was the only vehicle that could have made those tracks. The retired cop is now meticulously documenting every incident, fearing a violent escalation. The man has threatened to shoot children, engaged in nighttime prowling, and finally, after destroying a swing set, faced a short jail stint. The sense of dread hangs heavy in our neighborhood. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.